where we left off, and I'm hoping to maybe finish discussing Fahrenheit 451 today, because we're going to skip an awful lot towards the end. I don't know. It's probably going to be Friday. Where we left off was Montag and his wife are talking, if you can call it that. And he asked her, when did we meet? And she doesn't remember. And then she says it doesn't matter. And he says, no, I guess not. And about a page later, he's still thinking about all this, and he's thinking about how he saw her. Sorry, I'm going to sneeze. About how he saw her that night when he came home and had to have her stomach pumped. And we're told he remembered thinking then that if she died, he was certain he wouldn't cry. For it would be the dying of an unknown, a street face, a newspaper image. And it was suddenly so very wrong that he had begun to cry, not at death, but at the thought of not crying at death. A silly, empty man near a silly, empty woman, while the hungry snake made her still more empty. What does he mean, crying not at the thought of death, but of not crying at death? What makes him start to cry?
He don't love her.
He doesn't love her. There's no real connection there, okay? Even though they've been married 10 years. And he thinks, how do you get so empty? Who takes it out of you? And he also remembers the flower, the dandelion that Clarice had that day. And what she said, what a shame you're not in love with anyone. And he keeps on thinking, well, wasn't there a wall between him and Mildred when you came down to it? Literally not a wall, but one wall. Not just one wall, but so far 3. What's he mean? The wall screens. What's this book about? Ultimately, what's it about? Is it about censorship?
Isolation.
I mean, your thing tells you the classic bestseller about censorship. Ray Bradbury, I can't remember if it was an interview or a talk that he was giving. He said the book's not about censorship. Censorship is merely a vehicle, let's say, within the book to carry a meaning. It's more about something that he alludes to, just in this passage we just discussed.
Love.
Louder?
Love.
Okay, possibly. But just keep that question in your mind. If it's not about censorship, okay, what is it about? So, he keeps thinking, and they talk. He says something must be done. He says what? I don't know, etc., etc. And then they talk about Clarice. And she says, he says, I haven't seen her for 4 days. Have you seen her? No. He said, I meant to talk to you about her. Strange. I know the one you mean. And she says the whole family moved out. They left. Okay? And he says, you sure? I think she's dead. No, can't be talking about the same girl. No, I think she's dead. Okay? He notices a shadow move outside the house, and they start talking about her programs and such. Okay? And then he talks about, we burnt a woman. What? We burnt copies of Dante and Swift and Marcus Aurelius. She's asked, wasn't he a European? Yeah, something like that. Wasn't he a radical? And he says, you should have seen her, not Clarice McClellan, the woman that he burned. You should have seen her. She's nothing to me. She shouldn't have had books. It was her responsibility. She should have thought of that. This is page 51 in my version. I hate her. She's got you going, and next thing you know, we'll be out, no house, no job, nothing. She says, I hate the old woman. She's never seen her. She's never met her. Why does she hate her? She's got him thinking. You weren't there. You didn't see. There must be something in books, things we can't imagine, to make a woman stay in a burning house. She was simple-minded. That is, she was a fool. She was as rational as you or I, more so, and we burnt her. Okay? And he goes on and he talks about all the things he's burned, etc., etc. Okay? So, he doesn't show up for work, and Captain Beatty shows up. Captain Beatty says, just thought I'd come by, see how the sick man was. How'd you guess? Beatty smiles. I've seen it all. You were going to call for a night off. He says, go ahead, take the night off. And then Beatty says, when did it all start, you ask, this job of ours? No, has Montag asked that question? When did it all start? I mean, not in this particular scene, he hasn't. He does say something earlier. He says, well, I'd say it got started around about a thing called the Civil War. When was the Civil War? 1860 to 65. Okay? Even though our rule book claims it was founded earlier. He says, no, we didn't get along well. That is, we firemen, we people who burn books and stuff, we didn't get along well until photography came into its own. That is, there was photography before then, but it really started becoming popular around the time of the Civil War and later. Okay? Then motion pictures in the early 20th century, radio, television, things began to have mass. Montag sits in bed, not moving. Okay? Where's Mildred while this is happening? She's sitting in bed next to him. What's under his pillow? A book. Okay? So, he says it began with photography and then radio, TV, etc. And because they had mass, they became simpler. He says books once appealed to a few people, here, there, everywhere. They could afford to be different. He doesn't mean they could afford, like they had the money, but he means when you only had a few books, it didn't matter if this person had a book or that person had a book or that person had a book, because they could be different. The world was roomy, but then the world got full of eyes and elbows and mouths. What's he mean, eyes, elbows, and mouths? Everything's news. What else? This room's kind of crowded, right? You don't have room to kind of spread out on this table. I hate teaching in here when it's a class this large. If I've only got 8 students, it's a great room, okay? You want to be able to spread out everything. He said the world got full of eyes, elbows, mouths. Eyes, people watching, looking at each other. Elbows, hitting each other. Mouths, spouting, saying stuff. In other words, it got crowded. Now, he's probably referring to a notion of overpopulation. Okay? Double, triple, quadruple population. Films, radios, magazines, books. Leveled down to a sort of pace-putting norm. You follow me? What's he mean, books leveled down to a pace-putting norm? Not less books, simpler books. Simpler books. More easily readable books. Okay? Follow me? Beatty's kind of like, I think so. I don't think he does. So, Montag says that. So Beatty says, okay, now picture it. Okay, so get this in your mind's eye. 19th century man with his horses, dogs, carts, slow motion, right? How do you get from point A to point B? Walk, ride a horse, ride a buggy, bicycle, because bicycles were pretty new. In the 20th century, speed up your camera. That is, speed up the motion. Because what did we start having in the 20th century? Automobiles. First automobiles weren't very fast, but they're faster than walking, faster than most horses. Okay? So speed up your camera, speed everything up. So if you speed everything up, then what else has to happen? He's suggesting books get shorter. This book, it's only, with everything at the end, it's less than 200 pages. Most Russian novels, here's an example, written in the 19th century, minimum, you're looking at 500, 600, 700 pages. Big, massive suckers. Most 19th century British novels, 400, 500, 600 pages. Dickens, for example. Dickens wrote over 20 novels. They're all really, really long. Okay? So, he says books cut shorter. Condensations. That is, in the middle of the 20th century, a company came into existence. Reader's Digest. Okay? The whole purpose of Reader's Digest was to take a big book and to cut it down, to digest it into a smaller book. And Reader's Digest put out condensed books. They took classics of world literature and shortened them. How do they shorten them? Summarized it. You take out, quote unquote, unimportant material. But talk to a writer, and a writer will say, there is no unimportant material. That's why it's there. I'll give you, one of my pet peeves. Moby Dick by Herman Melville. It's the worst thing ever written in the world. I had a teacher in college who thought it was the greatest thing ever written. Her office was covered with images of whales. She was weird, man. Okay? But just absolutely loved Moby Dick. I'm a PhD in English literature. I've never finished Moby Dick. I get to the big, long section in the middle of it about whales, and my eyes gloss over, and my brain shuts down, and I'm like, nope, not. I know what happens. Why? Because I've read summaries of it. I've read paraphrases of it. Okay? Condensation, shorten the book. Tabloids. He's talking about the difference between a real, quote-unquote, newspaper, however you define it, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, something like that, and the tabloid, the thing you get in the checkout stand at the grocery store. Everything boils down to the gag, the snap ending. Mildred, snap ending. Notice, Mildred's just, a robot. She's merely repeating. So, classics cut to fit 15-minute radio shows. Bradbury isn't lying. In the late 40s, mid-50s, there were radio productions of classic works of literature reduced to 15, 30, or 30 minutes. When you watch something on the TV, like a sitcom, how long is that sitcom literally? It's about 22 minutes if it's a half-hour show, because there's 8 minutes of ads. In other words, over a third. Okay? Excuse me, over a fourth of that 30-minute segment is advertising. Something is being sold. Okay? So, classics cut to fit 15-minute radio shows, then cut again to fill a 2-minute book column. And I meant to bring one of these here, and I know we've got several of them in here. Winding up at last as a 10 or 12-line dictionary resume. I can, find, it's in here somewhere. I can find a copy, a kind of like Oxford Companion to English Literature. You can get that. And you can read Hamlet. And you have about 4 paragraphs that tell you what Hamlet is. Tell you what Hamlet is about. Well, you don't need to read Hamlet then. Every one of you, I shouldn't say this, but I will. Maybe sometime in high school, you had a literature course and you had to read something and you didn't want to read it. Some of you are grinning. What do you do instead?
Sport notes.
Spark notes, Cliff notes, schmoop. You get online and you read the summary. Okay? When I'm teaching a literature course, I tell students, that might be helpful for some stuff, but when we have an exam, it's not going to help you because there's going to be quotations from what we've read. Those usually aren't in Cliff Notes, Spark Notes, etc. So, the dictionaries were for reference. That is, they're to give you additional information about. They're not meant to supplant. But many were those whose sole knowledge of Hamlet, the title Monty. Notice he's saying, I know you've at least read the cover of the book before it gets burned. Whose sole knowledge is of a one-page digest in a book that claimed, now at last you can read all the classics. Keep up with your neighbors. And that's what these books were designed to do in the mid-20th century. Why? Because there is this idea in the mid-20th century in the United States that we want to raise the masses, everyday, ordinary, common people. We want to raise their level of intellectual understanding, and we want to make everybody equal. We want to give them all the same kind of understanding. Back in the early part of the 20th century, there was an Oxford professor who came out, a Harvard professor, who came out with what's called the 5-foot shelf of books. These are, I think there's about 180 in them, 180 books that fit a 5-foot long bookshelf. And the idea was, if you read all of that, then you were considered to be, quote unquote, well read. You were considered to be an intellectual. Just read these books. Nothing else. No other books. Just these books. Okay? And you've attained, that kind of level. So he says, do you see? Out of the nursery, into the college, and back to the nursery. What? Out of the nursery. How often do you read when you're in a nursery? A baby. You don't. Into college, notice what he's suggesting. No real learning, no real reading going on. And then you leave college and you're back into the nursery. Why? Because they don't read. What is their quote-unquote imaginative experience created of? The wall screens, the parlor walls. Okay? He says, there's your intellectual pattern for the past 5 centuries. This is set in like the year 2500, 24 or something. Okay? So he says, you get the idea? Speed up the film, Montag. Click, pick, look, eye, now flick, here, there, swift pace, etc., etc. Digest. So it starts with the idea of a digest of something, and then you get digests of that. It gets abbreviated and abbreviated and abbreviated. Politics, 1 column, 2 sentences, a headline. Well, what do we have today when somebody gives a speech? What gets on the quote-unquote evening news or the website? What's it called? The soundbite. That is, when a politician delivers a speech, the politician knows certain parts are going to get taken out and clipped. Okay? Those are the sound bites. That is, those are the parts you want everybody to remember. Ask not what you can do, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, JFK said in his inaugural address. That was taken to be a soundbite, even though television, 1960, it was still in its infancy. But many Americans, probably a majority of Americans, had them at the time. And that kind of thing got put on the news. So, he says, whirl man's mind around so fast under the pumping hands of publishers, exploiters, broadcasters, that the centrifuge flings off all unnecessary time wasting. What's his emphasis on? It's speed again. But notice what's being sped up. What's he really talking? Is he talking about censorship here? No, he's not. He's talking about technology. Using technology to get the information, the knowledge. And notice, this is 40 years before the internet. I mean, the internet really only gets big about 1993, 1994. Okay? So, Mildred starts smoothing the bedclothes. She puts her hand under the pillow. And Montague's like, school is shortened. Beatty goes on. Discipline relaxed. Philosophies, histories, languages dropped. English and spelling gradually neglected. Finally, almost completely ignored. How many of you, maybe you still did, how many of you had to learn, quote unquote, penmanship? You had to learn how to write in cursive. Okay? How many of you still can?
My name.
Okay, your name. Well, even that has now been dropped. Children, first, second, third, fourth, they're no longer taught cursive writing. Why? Because most people don't even use one of these anymore. It's all this. Okay? Life is immediate. The job counts. Pleasure lies all about after work. Notice, life is immediate. It's what's now. What's important? The very next phrase. The job. That's what counts. How do you know? He's writing this, publishes this, in 1953. How is that even more true now than it was in his day? Why are you here? I don't mean here in this classroom. I mean here at MTSU.
Get a degree.
Get a degree. Why?
For a job.
Because you think it's going to get you a job. Notice how I cast that. You think it's going to get you a job. You hope it's going to get you a job. Notice the difference between hope and think. Think it might. Hope, please, powers that be. 30 years ago, a college diploma almost guaranteed a job. It doesn't anymore. College diploma today is like the high school diploma of 30 years ago. I mean, I do mean to burst your bubbles. You need to be aware of this because you've probably been lied to by admissions counselors and such. A degree does not guarantee you a job in any way. Okay? Not even a degree in a really sought-after field. Because guess what? There's a bunch of other people getting that same degree. Okay? So you got to be really good in that field. All right? So, he says, the job counts, pleasure lies all after work. Why learn anything save? What's he saying, education? This is Beatty saying this, not Bradbury. Education is about pressing buttons, pulling switches, fitting nuts and bolts. What is pressing buttons, pulling switches, fitting nuts and bolts?
Just kind of like spewing out information. You're not thinking.
Okay, close.
It's like mindless.
It's mindless. And I'm going to use some examples. I'm not saying that these degrees or majors are mindless because they're not. Accounting. My son's in an accounting class right now, okay? What does that mean, accounting? Or recording industry. What are you doing if you're a recording industry major? What are you learning to do?
Record.
But that involves what? Soundboards, right? You got to learn how the soundboard works. You got to learn how to set up mics, how to set up PA systems, etc. And you got to be good at it, okay? That's the equivalent of pressing buttons, pulling switches, etc., etc. What is it not? It's not philosophy. It's not art history. It's not the history of economic thought, which is different than economics, okay? So, He goes on. The zipper displaces the button. What the hell is he talking about? Who cares whether you have a zipper or a button? All the jeans I buy are Levi's 501s. They're button fly. I hate zippers. Okay? Big deal. What's his point? The zipper replaces the button.
Quicker.
It's quicker. It's it. It's quicker. Zip a shirt up or button a shirt. Zip. It's done. These, each one. Why is that important?
So everything is sped up nowadays.
And that gives you what? Supposedly.
More time.
More time for?
Fun.
Anything? Pleasure? Does it give you more time so that you can spend more time at work? No, usually, because most people don't want to spend more time at work. So, and a man lacks just that much time to think while dressing at dawn. That is, he's implying that before the zipper, as one would get dressed, one would think maybe about the coming day. What have I got to do? Rather than just, and you're out of there. Okay? That's when Mildred reaches the book under the pillow. And she asks, what's this? Monty, sit down. So, he goes on. Beatty does. You like bowling, right, Montague? He said, yeah, fine. Basketball, billiard, yeah, fine. More sports for everyone. Group spirit, fun. And you don't have to think. Right? You don't have to think really in sports. I used to be a college athlete, etc. Organize, super sports. I used to coach kids soccer. Now, 10 years after the fact, I think I was a damn fool. Why? Because I treated those 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11-year-olds like they were FIFA World Cup soccer players. I worked their you-know-whats off, and I ripped them up one side and down the other if they didn't do it. They were 8, 9, 10, and 11-year-olds. Parents now do what to their children? All too often. Every aspect of their lives is controlled. It's regulated. It's youth sport, dancing, recitals, so that kids don't have time for what?
Free time to get in trouble.
Okay, thinking louder, Rico.
Free time to get in trouble.
Free time to get in trouble. Why is free time to get in trouble important for kids?
Learn from.
Builds character.
It builds character, you learn from it. Now kids are raised in cocoons or bubble wrapped. So they can't get in fights and learn. If Rico were to stand up and I'm standing next to him, who do you think's going to win? He's a little bit bigger than I am. It's good for a scrawny kid to learn. Don't pick a fight with somebody bigger than you unless you have reinforcements, But they can't do that. So he says, all right, more pictures, the mind drinks less and less impatience. Impatience. What is impatience? You can't wait, right? I want it now. How many of you remember in your lives, let's say, early on, maybe when you first got to start using a computer, probably in grade school, you turn it on and you'd have to wait a few minutes. And what would you usually think? Come on, hurry up. Now, I get upset if, I get the spinning wheel of death and I've got to, do something because it might take me an additional 30 seconds. That's his point. We become impatient about that. So, highways full of crowds going somewhere, nowhere. How many of you grew up in Murfreesboro? I've been in Murfreesboro for 28 years. Murfreesboro used to be a quote-unquote small, sleepy town. 80,000 people when I moved here. Now it's got like 140,000. And traffic is crazy. I'm from the West Coast. I'm from what's called Silicon Valley, San Jose. Some of the worst traffic in the United States. I know bad traffic. Murfreesboro is getting like Silicon Valley with, well under a tenth of the population because we don't plan, etc. So, he goes on. Towns turn into motels. People in nomadic surges from place to place. This is before what are called bedroom communities really start. Laverne, Smyrna. They're both what to Nashville? Suburbs. Sub means beneath, outside, urbs. Latin for city. They're outside. They're bedroom communities. Why? People don't really move to Laverne because they want to live in Laverne. They move to Laverne because they're working in Nashville, but they don't want to pay Nashville prices. So, he says, and this is where he gets a little more difficult for 2020 audiences. Now let's take up the minorities in our civilization. But notice how he addresses this, shall we? Bigger the population, the more minorities. What? How do you figure? How do you have bigger the population, the more minorities you have?
Because you have more different types of people.
So, what are the minorities that he talks about? Don't step on the toes of the dog lovers. Notice, he's suggesting that's a minority. Or the cat lovers. Doctors, lawyers, merchants, chiefs, Mormons, Baptists, Unitarians, second-generation Chinese. Notice not first, second-generation Chinese. Swedes, Italians, Germans, Texans, Brooklynites, Irishmen, people from Oregon or Mexico. In their world, let's say 2400 AD, each one of these can be considered a minority. Why? Because if you're from Mexico, then you're not from what? Excuse me, if you're from Oregon, you're not from what? Any of the 49 other states. Though at this time, when he's writing this, there aren't 50 states, right? There's still only 48. Alaska isn't a state yet, and Hawaii isn't a state yet. So he goes on. The people in this book, it could be this book, this play, this TV serial, are not meant to represent any actual. Have you all seen that, right? You go to a movie, and what's it say at the very end? All the people in this are fictional. They are not meant to represent anyone. Or a TV show will have the same disclaimer. Why? Because maybe I'm quote-unquote famous. And what I just saw sounds an awful lot like my life. You've just taken me, because I've been in the news, and you've done something about me on that. Well, this is the author, writer, producer, director's way of saying, nope, not you, totally fictional, not real. So, people in this book play TV serial, not meant to represent anybody. Bigger your market, Montag, the less you handle controversy. Remember that. What do you mean the bigger your market?
The more people that you can appeal to.
The more people you can appeal to, and why would you try to appeal to them? Money. We're in the middle of a beginning, not quite middle, of a presidential election, right? What does every presidential candidate do? He or she. What do they have to appeal to? Us. Who's the us? Each person in this room is a minority. Why? Because I'm me. I'm not Rico. Rico's not me. I'm me. I'm not Ray. Ray's not me. I'm me. I'm not Mark. And Marsha's not Ray. And Marsha's not Rico. You're each in a minority. So what does the candidate need to do? The candidate needs to find something that appeals to you, and appeals to you, and appeals to you, and so what do some candidates, not all, what do some attempt to do? They attempt to appeal to the lowest common denominator. I don't mean lowest like base or vile. I mean What one thing might appeal to every person in this room? What do you all have in common, in other words? Maybe debt, college student loans. There's Elizabeth Warren. There's Bernie Sanders. There's pretty much most of the Democrats. Okay. What else? You're all half my age. You're all young. So it might appeal to your youth. And because you're younger than I am, you will tend to be more idealistic and more hopeful about the future. See, I'm less hopeful about the future because I've lived in the past. I remember the 70s. And while there was some great music in the 70s, the economy sucked. Really, really, really bad in the 70s. I remember high inflation, 20% mortgages, 20% rates on mortgages. You know, even student loans were 14, 15% APRs. Okay? So, he goes on. Bigger your market, the less you handle controversy. That is because you don't want to anger anybody. All the minor minorities with their navels to be kept clean. Authors full of evil thoughts, lock up your typewriters. Why?
So they don't write something that's like controversial.
They don't write something that's controversial. Give me an example, if you can, of a book in the last 10 years that a group of college students or a college has said, we're not going to allow that to be read. Or where a student has said, I'm not going to read that.
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. Why?
Because it was about a lot of wizards and stuff.
Because it's got witchcraft. Now, that hasn't happened really much on college campuses. High school and elementary school. Elementary school, definitely. Okay? I'm thinking more college. Classics of American literature.
To Kill a Mockingbird, maybe?
To Kill a Mockingbird. Why?
It says racial slurs in it.
It says racial slurs in it. Okay? Give me another one. They usually have racial slurs. Mark Twain. You hear that reaction? Oh, God. I mean, because Mark Twain has a major character in Huckleberry Finn, or The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Nigger Jim. He said the word. There are college campuses where I just said the quote-unquote N-word, right? There is Emory University School of Law. Law, not undergraduate. Law school. A professor used the N-word in a class in talking about the First Amendment and censorship. Students complain. These are law students. These are not 18 to 22-year-olds. These are like 22 to 35 and 40-year-olds. Complain. And they're still in the process of trying to get him fired because he used the word in a class session talking about the First Amendment and censorship. Well, what's going on there? They're trying to censor. Okay? What's the point Bradbury's getting at in this passage? Authors full of evil thoughts, lock up your typewriters. What are the evil thoughts? Is using that word, when Twain used it in the 19th century, was it considered then evil? No, it wasn't. Turn on radio today. Listen to a lot of rap. You hear it all the time. It's not considered evil there, is it? No, it's not. Okay? So what's his point? Get rid of your typewriters. They did. They did, he says. They stopped writing those evil thoughts. Why? Magazines became a nice blend of vanilla tapioca. I don't like tapioca pudding. Everybody else in my family does. It's bleh. It's like tasteless marshmallow. But you put the vanilla on it, and it's like vanilla, blech, okay? Books, so the damned snobbish critics said, were dishwater. Why dishwater?
Dishwater's like gross.
It's dirty, and what do you do with it? You throw it out. It's dirty, it has a word, it has a phrase, it has an idea. Get rid of it. Okay? No wonder books stopped selling, the critics said. But the public, knowing what it wanted, spinning happily, let the comic books survive. In the three-dimensional sex magazines. Right? Magazines are two-dimensional. Actually, they're one-dimensional because they're flat. Three-dimensional sex magazines. There you have it, Monty. It didn't, what's the it? It didn't come from the government down. What's the it?
The like abolishment of reading.
Keep going.
Just
Censorship. It didn't come from the government down. Have we had the United States government, under any administration, Republican or Democrat, say you can't read this book because? No. Where does he say it comes from? It comes from me saying, I don't want you to read, because I'm a right-wing Republican, I don't want you to read Karl Marx. Why? Because he's the founder of communism and socialism. And all of his ideas, whenever and wherever they've been tried, they lead to death. Okay? Which is true, by the way. They generally do. Okay? So therefore, you can't read that. How do you make somebody want to read something?
No.
Tell them you can't. How do you make someone want to see a film they may not naturally want to see? You can't. I outlaw it. That draws attention. So, he goes on. What is more easily explained and natural? With school turning out more runners, jumpers, racers, tinkerers, grabbers, snatchers, flyers, swimmers, etc., critics, knowers, and imaginative creators, the world than these others, intellectual became the swear word it deserved to be. Come on. You remember the boy in your own school class who was exceptionally bright, did most of the reciting, answering, while the others sat like so many leaden idols, hating him. Do any of you remember something like that? Were you ever in a class? There was one person, you mentioned Harry Potter, who was always like Hermione Granger, always knew the answer, always threw a hand up. And what did most everybody else how did they regard that person? What's the phrase? A know-it-all. And what sometimes did you want to do? Exactly what he says. Take that person, as Joe Biden likes to say, behind the bleachers, beat the snot out of them. Why? If that person's a know-it-all, what does that say about everybody else? Stupid, dumb, know-nothings. Look at what he says. Wasn't it this bright boy you selected for beatings and tortures? Why? We must all be alike. We must all be alike. We must all be the same. I mean, the Declaration of Independence says that, right? What's it say? We are all endowed by our Creator with rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we must all be alike. No. We're all created equal. Does that mean we all have equal abilities? No. He's talking about what is today called equality of outcomes. Because we're not all equal in our abilities, the idea is we have to make everybody equal in their outcomes. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, I were to say, starting today, this class is going to go full-on socialist. And here's how that's going to work. You're all going to write your papers and everything, and you're all going to get your grades, your individual grades, but I'm going to take all those grades and add them all together, and then I'm going to divide them by the number of people in this class. And that will be the grade you earn. How many are for that idea? Yeah, it's kind of what I thought. Why?
It's not fair if you do good. You can get dragged down or vice versa.
Okay, you can get dragged. But what if you just say, cool, because I'm not going to give a damn. Because if everybody else cares, then I can say,
Screw it.
screw it, man. You guys work hard. I'll take what everybody else gets.
And that's what everybody else says.
And if everybody else says that,
And we all fail.
I'll be the first one to say.
okay, because what does that lead to? It gives you no incentive, right? So what if instead of that, I said, okay, we're going to ditch the socialism. We're going to go full bore capitalism. I mean, just whole hog. And for every A grade you earn, that is you really work at, I'm going to give you $100. Let's say I had that kind of wealth. I'm going to give you $100 for every A you earn. How hard are you going to try to earn an A? And I'll give you 70 for a B,
Oh, I'm good.
50 for a C.
Whoa.
But if you're an F, you owe me 50.
That is how capitalism works.
That's pretty good, incentive, isn't it? Okay. So, each man, not everyone born free and equal, as the Constitution says. I know we're almost done. But everyone made equal. Each man the image of every other. Then all are happy, for there are no mountains to make them cower, no to judge themselves against. So, and here's the money quote. Here's the sound bite. A book is a loaded gun in the house next door. What in the world does that have to do with anything else he's been saying? How is a book a loaded gun in the house next door?
The ideas in a book can inspire people to take action.
If Rico reads a book that you guys don't have access to, and that gives him ideas, that makes him want to do something more, but you don't have that. What's that do for his possibilities in life? It increases it. Therefore, boom. Why? Because if we take Rico out of the mix, we're all equal again. It lowers that. It makes that average. Okay? That's a dangerous idea, right? But he's saying books are what? Books have dangerous ideas. Why? What do they do? What does this book, hopefully, what did this book make you do? A little bit. It makes you think. And if you start thinking, what's one of the things you might start thinking about?
So,
Yourself? What else?
Country.
Country?
Revolution.
Revolution. The Bernie Bros. We're going to burn it all down and start over. We're going to overthrow. Or maybe things like, I don't like how things are and I want to try to change them. And so you start to not fit the mold. You don't conform. You go against the flow. All right? We're going to stop there, and we will finish this on Friday. And what we're going to do on Friday is finish talking this. We're going to talk a little bit about the rest, just a few pages more here. But then once Montag meets the character named Faber, okay, all I'm going to say about the very end is about what happens to Montag when he leaves the city, okay, and then a little bit about the coda, if your book has it. And if we have time, we're going to start talking about some possible paper topic ideas. And then probably Monday, I'm going to walk you through a bunch of stuff on the library, okay? And in the meantime, I'm probably going to send a couple of articles or post some articles on D2L that I'd kind of like you to read in connection with this.
Has the paper date changed or stayed the same? I missed.
I haven't said anything about the paper date. I don't know if it'll probably change a little bit.
I think
Yeah. I think it's,
Yeah, the syllabus said like this coming Monday.
yeah, it's definitely not going to be there.
Okay.
It'll be a week or two later than that. All right.
Yeah, that's fine.